well, let's just kick this off. It's actually almost quiet here for a second. So I am super, super excited to be here in Amsterdam with Cornelia Dinca. Cornelia, really quickly, just introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, John. Very nice to meet you in person. Finally, we've been corresponding for a few years, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to Amsterdam. So to say, you've been around for a while, but very happy to take you around for a little bike tour. I do this more often. Sustainable Amsterdam. I do a lot of study programs and a few other things around, using study programs as a tool of sharing best practices from Amsterdam, sharing that internationally, with a focus on sustainable urban development. So a lot of best practices related to mobility, cycling, but also things like climate-proofing the city. How do we deal with climate change? And also how do we build just nice places to live? And all of that we'll see on this tour of Amsterdam Noord today.
Yeah, fantastic. And we also have Amanda with us again. Hi, Amanda, introduce yourself.
I'm Amanda Popken McCullough with Popken Pop-Ups. I'm just here in Amsterdam living now, just soaking up all of its urbanism. And I think John knows a little bit more about the city than I do at this point. I've probably been here a total of 3 weeks, but I'm everywhere I look, I'm just amazed. So I'm excited to chat with you guys today.
Fantastic, and we're at a very, very special place. Why don't you really introduce where we're standing right now?
Sure, so we're standing in front of Central Station, and we're just about to go visit or check out the new underwater bike parking garage in Amsterdam for 7,000 bikes. So not the largest bike parking garage in the Netherlands, because the Utrecht garage is in many ways, you could say, more impressive. But this is in many ways also the new standard and quite impressive to see.
Yeah, and it's underwater too.
It is underwater, and that has to do with the fact that Central Station is actually built on an island. So you might not have the impression immediately, but we're actually surrounded by water. So that's the reason why it's under the water. There was no easy location to build this garage otherwise.
I love it. Let's go check it out.
Let's see.
This is so cute.
Is this your first time seeing
No
this?
riding, yes.
Nice.
Okay, now these travelators are supposed to be moving right now, and they're not. So this is the first failure, and this is one of the reasons why Amsterdammers complain about the garage, I have to say. So.
And here we are. We're going water level here, slightly below. The boats are going by. Yeah, no, this is pretty fun. There's one travelator going. It's going up.
Yeah. On the way up, we'll have a little bit of help.
Yeah. For part of the way.
But you probably remember the Fietsflat. The Fietsflat is actually the garage that all the Amsterdammers prefer to use.
Yes.
And since this garage opened last year, everyone is being forced to park here to justify this new garage.
Yeah.
But Amsterdammers basically complain because it takes longer to park your bike.
Yeah.
And because these travelators are often not working. So it's not perfect.
It's not perfect. Very, very interesting. And here we go. You get the first 24 hours free.
Okay, so just maybe hold off for me for 1 second, because I need to let them know that you don't have a card.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so how long has this been open for?
This opened last year, so just over a year.
Fantastic.
In total, it took about 10 years, the whole process of planning and building it.
Right.
They basically needed to pump the water out and then build a garage and then basically let the water come back in again.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of the same kind of standard elements of all the new bike parking garages of this kind of new generation, so to say. So very light, very high ceilings. This is because with the old garages, the garages that were built previously, They typically had much lower ceilings, were much darker, and
Yeah.
that was the main reason why people were not using them.
Right. Yeah, so this gives you a very, very light sort of feel, and even up above here you have these little murals and sort of almost like portholes, a very nautical sort of theme in
Yeah,
here
exactly.
too.
Yes, they really played actually on the water element. There's quite a few different
Yeah.
art pieces embedded. Actually, also on the left, they have
Yeah.
a commission that looks after the art
Right.
piece in all these infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
But basically, we've been kind of walking along the garage just now, and then on this end, basically, you come up into the entrance to the metro and train station.
Okay.
So the city basically aims that from the time you're at the top of the garage where we started,
Yeah.
to the time you come down, park your bike, and then come up the escalators on the other side.
Yeah.
That should take you a maximum of 2.5 minutes. That's
Okay.
the goal.
That's the goal.
Okay. Now, every 10 seconds you can shave off of that time is ideal. So
Sure.
you can get your bike chipped, for example, so
Okay.
that when you come in and you check in your bike,
Right.
you don't have to stop and take out your train card.
Right.
So that kind of shaves off another 10 or 20 seconds.
Yeah.
But Amsterdammers are still always complaining because
Yeah.
it's not fast enough.
Yeah.
And because the Fietsflat was much faster as a way of parking.
Yeah, and we see the same thing in Utrecht as well. I've been staying there for a while. And I noticed that a couple years ago too, when the new station, they're really trying to encourage people to use that new station. But old habits are hard to break, right? You know, it's like when it was easier and faster just to like come right up and then lock your bike outside and then dash in to catch your train. It's like, you know, kind of working on shaping the behaviors, reforming those behaviors of a little bit of extra time, get down here, get set, and
Yeah.
then be able to, head
Yeah.
right on up and catch your train.
Yeah, and
So-
the city is very strict actually on confiscating the bikes that are parked outside.
Yeah.
So they don't tolerate that. And that's
Yeah.
because maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, if you would have been here, then you would have seen all
The bikes.
Yeah, like all the
Yeah.
bikes scattered
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
And it's very, very strict on enforcing that people actually come down, park their bike. But it also has to make sure that it's a very smooth transfer because people get very frustrated if they take 10 minutes to bike
Yeah.
to the train station, but then
Yeah.
if you need another 10 minutes to park your bike, that's not fast enough.
Yeah.
So it has to be a very smooth transfer. And for a long time, this was actually one of the biggest fights in the city between the city and the train station. But actually, in many other cities, it was a very, very big problem.
Right.
This lack of parking capacity.
Yeah.
And basically, in the last 10 years, came much better collaboration between the city and the public transport, let's say the train company, and with quite a bit of funding, let's say, from different levels of government to implement these kinds of.
And this is number 2,
infrastructures.
so this is the second of 2 train, bike garages that were constructed as part of this to get those bikes off of that thing. So this one was 7,000?
This is 7,000 bike
Yeah.
parking spaces on the front side, and then there's also a new garage on the back side of the
Right.
station. That's a smaller one. That's about 4,000, I believe.
Fantastic.
So in total, I believe there's somewhere around 20,000 spaces around the station now, and the goal is to get to, I believe, something like 25,000 by 2030 or so.
Fantastic.
And
Love
they're
it.
intended for a 24-hour stay, or?
It's not, yeah, so
Nuts.
actually, so it's intended that you park for free for the first 24 hours, but the garage itself is unfortunately not open 24/7, so it's actually open, I believe, until something like 1 o'clock in the morning till it's like 6 o'clock in the morning till 1 o'clock. So the party people have to plan around picking up their bike.
Right.
There's a small chance you might
Yeah,
not be
yeah.
able to fetch your bike.
Yeah.
If you're catching like the night train from Rotterdam and you come here at 3 o'clock in
Yeah.
the morning and you have a bike in here, you're not going to be able to get to it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But for most people, it's not a problem. Yeah.
And so then it's a fee, a nominal fee for each
Yeah,
day
so it's like
afterwards.
€1.50 or so,
Yeah.
and that's really there to tackle the issue of orphan bikes.
Right.
So
Yes.
a very big issue the last, for almost a decade has been the fact that all these cities would build all these garages, and then in a matter of years they would be at capacity again, and they'd be scratching their head going like, what's going on? How come
Yeah.
these garages just get filled up? And basically they've started looking into it a little bit and found out that somewhere around 20%, sometimes up to 25% of bikes are either orphaned, so just abandoned, or biked for prolonged periods of time, because
Right.
effectively the way you're like now staying in Utrecht, but you might every day you're maybe biking to you're taking the train to Amsterdam or Rotterdam.
Right.
So Dutch people do this quite often as well, where they have a bike at all these different train stations.
Right.
And in many cases, they just leave them parked there forever.
Right.
And that's what is now being discouraged. So with this new policy, the fact that you're no longer parking your bike for free forever, it's really discouraging that people just leave all these bikes at all these different stations.
Right.
So you should really just have kind of your main your main station that you're kind of biking to, and taking the train, and then at the end of the trip you should just be getting one of the OV bikes, and that's what we also saw on the way in. We can check it out on the way out.
Right.
So then you'd pick up one of these OV bikes rather than leaving all these scattered bikes at all these different stations.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's working quite well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's head up to the Nord.
Yeah, very good.
Nice.
I'm curious how you're supposed to get your bike on top there.
You've never used a top rack. I also don't often use the top rack because it's. I mean, with this kind of bike especially, because it's. You typically you only use a top rack if you really have to.
Oh, okay. You have to lift it up?
So it's the rack itself does some of the work for you. I don't know how excited I am to do a full demonstration, but so this part is fairly easy.
Oh.
So the difficult part is still you need to kind of get your wheel into the rack and then kind of push it up. And with the heavy, like with these kinds of bikes, but even with my bike, it's very, very heavy. And then on the way up, like this kind of comes up.
I was worried about that part.
No, that's not the hard part. The hard part is really just getting your wheel in and then kind of pushing the wheel to the front. So quite often you'll see more like these kinds of the lighter bikes and the fixie types.
Oh yeah.
Kind of do much better on the top rack, and you'd only really use the top rack if you have no choice, or if you're really trying to get your workout, I guess. But they've done some research.
It is spring loaded, so it's not that heavy. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's they've done campaigns. So for example, like at universities, they'll have these campaigns like, be a hero, use the top rack if you can, so you can leave the bottom rack to the people who can't don't have the strength. I think they've looked into it, they've done some research on it, and I think something like 50 or 60% of the population doesn't actually have the strength to use the top rack. So
those young college kids, though.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is so beautiful.
Yeah, and then you'll notice these black cameras on the ceiling. Actually, that's how they monitor how many of the racks are occupied.
Okay.
And that's also how they display at the top of the garage how many parking spaces are available. And that's a requirement for all the new garages. So all the garages in this kind of new wave of the bike parking garages have to implement a few of these elements. So around taller ceilings, much brighter system for monitoring how many of the spaces are occupied. Also usually an area for electric charging. That's kind of a new requirement for most garages as well. Usually you also have an area for the kind of oversized bikes, or the bikes with crates, or the cargo bikes. And here you have all the OV bikes. And then because the OV bikes are not accessible for the tourists, because you need a transport car that's linked to a Dutch address, they actually also have the donkey bikes. And the donkey bikes are quite often used by the tourists.
Got it. Very well done.
I actually had the Minister of Transport from Baden-Württemberg. I did a tour I mentioned for his delegation last year. And actually very similar to what you said, they had been to Amsterdam about 10 years before when they had just announced or approved the construction of the garage. And they wanted to see it right after it was open. And one of his advisors when we were in here, he basically said, in Strasbourg, sorry, not in Strasbourg, in Stuttgart. In Stuttgart, we would have just built a garage for 300 cars instead of building a bike garage for 7,000 bikes.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, for me, was like a very nice example of the physical dimension to it. So how space efficient it is to park all of these bikes. And and that's really in the end the driver. So the fact that you have 50% of the people on the train arriving at the station by bike.
Right.
This is really why you need this very smooth transfer from the bike to the train.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the beauties of the Dutch network is that integration of bike and train.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact actually the fact that it actually evolved quite organically. So for a long time the Dutch didn't realize it wasn't really per se planned.
Right.
So for a long time again they had this whole tension and friction and fights between the cities and the train companies on who's going to pay for this infrastructure.
Right.
And then at some point basically also at the University of Amsterdam and elsewhere there started to be some research and some awareness, like, wait a second, this is not a problem, this is actually a solution, but it was not really even appreciated until...
It's like our superpower.
Exactly, but it was like having to start to appreciate your superpower rather than, this is a problem, this is not a problem, this is actually like part of the solution.
And what I love too is the OV-Fiets bikes are also integrated with that same chip.
Yeah, for all public transport actually, so it's I think one of the it's the first example, I think, internationally of one car that integrates all public transport across the country.
Yeah.
And then the shared bikes are part of that as well. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Love
Let's
it.
head back upstairs.
Let's do it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Oh, this is really lovely.
Isn't it amazing?
Just hold your brakes tight.
I wasn't sure if you had toured this yet or not. So
No, I was
like,
really
all right,
excited
we need to make
meet
sure
you.
we do that.
Oh
it
my
was
God.
not on the plan.
My bike
but-
is so heavy.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Well,
This
you'll get
is
your workout
so
on getting
incredible.
up this one because it's not
Yeah.
working.
Yay. This
You
is
needed
so
a workout
incredible.
today, right?
I need a video of this. This
Okay,
is
all right. Yeah, that very, very impressive and so needed, you know. I remember what it was like when all the bikes were over on the other side and stacked multiple layers all along the
Now
waterfront.
there is a bit of like if you're going to put a bit of a critical angle on it, and actually that one of the things that the cyclist union kind of pushed back on with the proposal of this new garage. Just in front, actually, you have a car garage that's never used at capacity.
Right.
So from a cost perspective, you could have actually also just retrofitted the car garage or part of the car garage into a bike garage. But then you wouldn't get a lighthouse anchor project that's a showcase that everyone is coming to see and film.
Absolutely. And guess what? Doing this doesn't necessarily mean you can't do that as well, because if it's still underutilized, what the heck? Let's just convert that.
Yeah, but I think it's also going to take quite a while for this garage to really get to capacity. So for the time being with this, you don't really need to expand the capacity immediately, even though there's already plans for expanding the capacity. But it's also a little bit more to say that there is kind of some tension or some friction on do we kind of retrofit infrastructure in a cost-effective way, or do we build something shiny and new? And in this case, I think it's also fine to once in a while build something shiny and new, but it's it is part of the discussion. Also, for example, you probably spent some time in the pipe. So because that's also now very kind of popular point of attraction. All the parking spaces that have been removed from the street for this underwater car garage. Okay. And that's a version of all the Dutch engineers getting very excited to build the bike garage under the water and the car garage under the water because we can. But that garage, I believe the cost per parking space was somewhere around 50,000 euros per parking space. That is incredibly expensive. So if we talk about this vision of transitioning to a car light city or wanting to push the cars out or restrict the car. There's a lot that you can do, and you can get much more creative on different ways of stimulating people not to use their car than building these very expensive
make it easy.
underwater car garages. So there's a bit of a discussion still on kind of the cost benefit, and how do you decide where do you invest the money is a discussion.
I love it. Okay. All right.
So let's just head over to the backside.
Yep.
And we maybe just for a second here walk our bikes, and then we can get on. This actually is also, I don't know if you know about this this knip, this cut. So cars used to be able to travel east-west, and now that access is cut actually, so it's hard to kind of really appreciate it because it's work in progress.
Right.
But that was it was one of these very controversial cuts. The fact that if you're trying to cross the city east-west, you can no longer do it in front of the Central Station, you have to do it on the backside only.
Right. Yeah, I saw that it was, in construction, in the progress of being redesigned, and I was wondering what the history was on that.
The cut, yeah, that's one of those
it's-
strategic east-west
Yeah,
cuts.
yeah.
That's always very controversial when it's first proposed, but
Right.
then works out pretty well once it's implemented. And here on the left, that's the Fietsflat.
Okay.
So that's the old bike parking garage before we got this
Right.
new fancy garage.
Yeah.
Which Amsterdammers loved much more.
Yeah.
It was also the most photographed object in Amsterdam for a long time.
Yeah. And partly just because of the grittiness, the novelty, and the chaos of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's also
Yeah.
a few very clever design elements. So when this was first designed, there were quite a few constraints. So it's over the water, and it needed to allow for these boats to turn around underneath it.
Yeah.
But also the whole way of actually walking up this ramp, where they also took into account how do you prevent that you're going to get people who are going to sleep, for example, in the garage.
Right.
So, but also so kind of creating this very transparent structure.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of design elements that were very well done.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be used for about 10 years. It ended up being used for much longer.
Yeah.
And in principle, it could still be used. So a lot of people were very upset that they were forced now to park in the
Yeah.
new garage.
Yeah.
And that this is no longer operating.
Yeah.
There were discussions about actually gifting it to Paris for the Olympics.
Yeah.
And in the end, I think no one wanted to pay for the transport. That was the biggest issue.
Yeah. Okay.
Neither Amsterdam or Paris wanted to pay for the transport.
Yeah.
There's also been some discussions, some proposals, kind of very bottom-up proposals from residents that say, well, we should just turn it into a terrace. It'd be quite a nice place if you're going to green it a little bit,
Yeah,
and
there
then
you go.
very nice little terrace over the water.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly when they're going to take it away.
Yeah.
But and it is a little bit sad to see it like this,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's much more charming when you have all the bikes, like you said, kind of the
Yeah.
that once it's animated with all the bikes being parked, then it really has a certain dimension to it.
Yeah, there's
and
a little charm to it,
that's the reason why they become this most photographed object in Amsterdam.
I could totally see it as a terrace. I mean, it's good people watching.
Yeah, people watching, bike watching. Yeah.
All right, cool.
All right, let's head to the back.
Yeah, it's really extraordinary how busy it is today.
Yeah, so weekends in general, but this is also now, I mean, Amsterdam got back to kind of pre-COVID levels of tourism very quickly, actually.
Yeah.
And now we've I think we've blown past the pre-COVID levels.
Right.
So we'll just hold off and actually probably get on the next ferry, just because I wanted to explain a few things here.
Okay.
Have you talked a little bit, or do you know a little bit about all the transformations around the backside of the station already?
No, not really.
Not really?
Yeah.
Okay, so then
let's definitely cover that.
So
Yeah.
then it's worth covering.
Yeah.
So the backside of the station, maybe that's a good place to start. When you talk to people who have lived here their entire lives, they will tell you that the backside of the station we used to be a no-go area in the 80s and the 90s. So I've actually even had somebody who said, you'd only come to the backside of the station for some cheap drugs and a prostitute, for example, okay? So very big priority for the past decade has been to mend the urban fabric for pedestrians and for cyclists, to make it easy for people to come to the backside of the station, and then with these ferries to go over to Amsterdam Noord. So that's actually where we're heading to. Officially, it's been part of Amsterdam since the 1920s, but in people's minds, it's not really part of Amsterdam because it's a place historically for migrants and for lower socioeconomic classes. But it's actually also where a lot of the growth is happening at the moment in these kind of post-industrial areas, and that's also what I'd like to show you on the tour. But this used to be actually a very busy throughway for cars, very typical actually, kind of post-war. A lot of these main roads were built along the waterfront. So one of the major projects at the station has been to put the cars under the ground in a tunnel. And actually you see kind of in the distance, you kind of have a view of the cars coming in and out of the tunnel. And that's also what I kind of explained when we were at the front of the station. So at the front, you also used to have cars traveling east-west. Now with this cut, that's no longer the case. So the only access for cars crossing the city east-west in this area is on the backside through the tunnel. So that's a very major transformation, you could say, and that's kind of just the start of it. Because you also have actually this expansion of the station. So this is actually a new bus terminal at the top. That's because the buses used to be on the front side of the station. It was very congested. So this is actually an extension to place the buses on top, actually on the same level with the trains. Actually the waterfront is also part of this extension with this new bike garage for the 7,000 bicycles underneath the promenade here. Okay? But the station has basically been one massive construction site for as long as I've lived here, for the past 12 years. Among Amsterdammers, there's also a little bit of a joke that construction at Central Station will never be finished, because as soon as one project is finished, there's the next project starts. But even, I mean, this promenade and this waterfront is something that's relatively new. So this is less than 2 years old, actually, or a couple years old, I should say, that people are able to really come and enjoy the waterfront. So really mending this urban fabric and also making it easier for people to come from the front side of the station and what people think of Amsterdam as. So most people would come out of the station, enter the city. They have no idea that Amsterdam is a waterfront city. And that's really been, let's say, the big effort from the city is to reconnect the city to the waterfront. Yeah. You could actually say this about many cities that kind of turned their back on the water. Right. So now there's this effort to kind of reconnect to the water. Yeah. And actually, one of the things I like to also always mention in this context, for many architects and urbanists, the biggest mistake Amsterdam ever made was to build Central Station where it's built, because that was actually the moment when the city lost its connection to the waterfront. This is the reason why arriving in Amsterdam, where we were just at, you don't have this idea or this connection or understanding that Amsterdam is a waterfront city. You have to come here to really experience that. So, so I'll mention maybe the shared space, because that's a big thing. We would need an hour just to talk about all the things going on at the station, and that's maybe not the intention. But the infamous shared space. This was a very controversial project. The question was really how to deal with this busy location where you have the east-west bike lane meeting with everyone getting on and off the ferries and in and out of the tunnel. The city originally designed a roundabout design, and then fairly late in the process they changed their mind and decided to go for the shared space concept. So newspapers wrote how these anarchistic cyclists are going to be running over pedestrians, how it's going to be a bloodbath. There's a lot of concerns and there's a lot of near misses, but there's very few accidents. And that's because people do slow down, make eye contact, and it's kind of this very organic intermingling and flow that actually works quite well. So it can be very intimidating, and there's a few groups that feel very uncomfortable with it, especially people with visual impairments. The elderly and actually tourists are also quite often very uncomfortable with it, also because they don't really understand the way you have to navigate it, the fact that you have to claim your space. Right. But in principle, it works quite well. And the area was very closely monitored the first couple of years, and there's very few accidents.
Yeah.
A lot of near misses, but very few accidents. Okay?
And as you mentioned, it really is a major cycling corridor. Just down here, you have plenty of new housing down that way. So I know, having been here during rush hour on a weekday, there's like a constant flow of people on bikes, and you're absolutely right. You know, the ferry unloads and then it's just this massive mingling. And it's so cool because it's sort of like this chaos and like a ballet of human movement. And you're absolutely right. There's lots and lots of near misses, but that's fine if you're traveling closer to human speed.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's actually, we hear, so probably you're thinking Utrecht, the busiest train station in the Netherlands. That's absolutely true, but as a hub, Amsterdam is actually busier. So for the train station, Utrecht is the largest.
Yeah.
But in terms of a multimodal hub, where you have all of these modes coming together, so if you tally up all the train passengers, but also the buses, passengers, also the ferries, and then it's actually a much busier mobility hub as a whole. So this it's not really people only using it because they live in the area. It really is like the main central station of the city. So it's been a really big improvement the last few years. And maybe just a couple other things that I wanted to point out. So because I also do a lot of work much more on kind of the smart city topics. So what's that actually mean? What does that look like in the city? So very kind of classic example of smart city infrastructure. You see the cameras at the top.
Right.
Those are actually monitoring how many people and bikes get on and off the ferries. And you need that data to know, for example, do you need extra ferries on certain holidays or first festival days or whatever that might be.
Right.
So this red sticker that you see on the left here, you see the red sticker also on the right. That's part of the what's called the sensor register of the city of Amsterdam, and that's an effort to give transparency on what are these sensors in public space and what kind of data they're collecting for what reason.
Right.
And that's because there's a lot of pushback against kind of this surveillance society. A lot of people don't want all these cameras in the city. So the intention is by giving transparency on what kind of data they're collecting for what reason. That's a way of building trust. And it doesn't mean you actually see the data in real time, but you get an explanation for what are these sensors used for, let's say.
Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
Now, I think we're actually just going to get the next one. We're heading to Amsterdam Noord. So the thing you see that's missing over the water is a bridge. Okay? And that is the main reason in many ways also why there's this, that's one of the main reasons why in people's minds Amsterdam North is not really part of Amsterdam. Is because there's this very strong kind of lack of connectivity, you can say.
Right.
So there's the first bridge proposed over the Eye. We call this a river even though it's a bay. The first bridge that was proposed was actually in the late 1800s. We've been talking for more than 100 years about a bridge.
Wow.
But every time the city wants to build a bridge, the national government vetoes it because it wants the access to the waterway for all the barges and all the access to the port of Amsterdam.
Right.
So this water doesn't actually belong to the city. So there are now two bridges that are actually confirmed. The first one will be on the east flank, actually connecting over from Java Island. And then there will be another one later on over on the west flank. But this will take, I think the first one maybe it'll be ready 2035 or so.
Okay.
But who knows? These
Pretty
are
soon.
2035.
Yeah.
So another 10 years for sure. But we also know the bridge will not be here. We always assumed the bridge would be right across from Central Station.
Right.
But we have now enough also data and understanding that the city's rolled out so much that it doesn't make sense to have the bridge here.
Okay.
It makes sense to have it on the flanks.
Okay.
We're talking about a bike and pedestrian bridge. There's access actually for cars, motorized traffic under the water.
Right.
And actually the tunnel that connects over from the Nemo was originally designed with bike lanes before the Second World War. But it was built after the Second World War when bikes were no longer the future.
Right.
So it was built without bike lanes, and this is the reason why the ferries are running for free to provide that connectivity for people and bikes.
I love it. again, to your point, you know, just that whole shared space thing, it's when you like leave it to people to kind of figure it out, they do.
Yeah, and it's also this. I always I didn't mention it in this case, but this element of kind of objective safety versus subjective safety plays into that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So streets that where you feel safe are sometimes more unsafe because they're designed for higher speeds. So in this case, it's kind of playing to that element of you feel a little bit unsafe, but that's the reason why it's safer because everyone is more alert and you're slowing down and taking turns.
Yeah, I mean Hans Monderman, you know, talked about that all the time.
But he's the father of the shared space idea.
Yes,
in fact.
exactly. You know, he's like, oh, so you as a driver are feeling like you're a little uncomfortable. Good, then you'll slow down.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, fantastic.
So now what you'll experience actually crossing now the river, and that's the concept here. Speaking a little bit about this ballet that you can observe the cyclists kind of this kind of organic chaos, let's say, also plays actually out on water.
Yeah.
And that's also quite a conscious effort to activate the waterfront. So you have a few of these anchor projects. Mm-hmm. The Amsterdam Tower, so everything in front of us is like this new city center on the north side of the river. Mm-hmm. And then you have a couple more anchors like the Palace of Justice, Central Station, BIM House is a modern contemporary dance center. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that with these anchors, you kind of animate a square on the water.
Right, yeah.
And this is actually also, if you just spend some time, for example, from the eye, watching the waterfront, it's kind of like people watching, but then the same dynamic of interaction and intermingling on the water. That's again this very conscious, this very conscious effort to animate the waterfront and the water itself.
Yeah. Very cool.
I was just noticing this swing up there for the first time.
Yeah. It's fun. It's very playful.
Is it? Have you done it?
No, but I filmed it. Yeah, several times.
Oh my God, I've got to
you
do
get
that.
a good view.
You're over the water.
Yeah, you get a good view of the swing.
Better than the London Eye, I bet.
Yeah, the whole area itself is quite an interesting story because the whole area used to be Shell terrain. It used to be Shell terrain.
Oh.
So actually the tower itself was the headquarters of Shell. It was the first high-rise built in Amsterdam as the headquarters of Shell, And the ELA building, the brick building next to it, that was the research and development lab of Shell.
Yeah.
So Shell still has a small presence on the left, actually. You still see their logo a little bit further down.
Yeah.
But Shell kind of moved out and the whole area is being transformed into this new city center on the north side of the river. So as opposed to kind of what people think as a city center, as you come out of Central Station and enter the city, the kind of polycentric approach of having also a city center, the modern city center on the north side of the river.
Yeah, you can really see the...
And so the Eye, that's the film center, that was really one of the anchor projects that was built to attract all kinds of people to animate the transformation of the waterfront. And when it was first proposed, many people were quite critical, like why are we building this very expensive building in Amsterdam Noord? And that's when the city said, well, if we want this to be part of Amsterdam, we have to treat it that way. We have to also invest here. And this anchor approach of really building kind of an iconic building combined with all the other developments around it has been very successful in kind of kickstarting the transformation.
Good call.
It's like
see if we can outrun it.
We're racing the rain.
Should we stop here in this little cafe?
I think let's see if we can make it to the Ceuvel, actually.
Okay.
At least the wind's at our back. So now that it's not as scary, crazy. So yeah, a little bit more about the history of this. I know over to the right, we've got some older historic portions.
Yeah, so actually this whole Amsterdam North used to be basically villages. And we're actually going to just now bike through this quaint neighborhood that was built in the 1920s, I believe, inspired by the Garden City movement coming out of the UK.
Yeah, yeah.
So basically you have a period, late 1800s, early 1900s, of very rapid industrial development, so kind of booming industry, especially related to shipbuilding.
Right.
And as that happens, you have an influx of people, so you have workers
Right.
moving actually from the countryside to the cities.
Right.
And then also very much also moving to Amsterdam North, and these were the kinds of neighborhoods that were being built to house these workers in these new industrial estates.
Yeah. Yeah, and the architecture is quite distinctive, and it's kind of cozy too. You know, it's
yeah, I
very
mean, for me, it's
interesting.
really quite hard to believe that this was built in the 1920s, right? I mean, it was
Yeah.
also actually just recently in the last few years retrofitted.
Right.
This district became quite controversial because it was one of the first locations in Amsterdam where the city tried to disconnect an existing neighborhood from natural gas.
Okay.
So this is part of city's policy of transitioning away from gas.
Right.
So all new construction is built without a connection to gas.
Right.
But the challenge is what to do with the existing city. So there's been kind of an analysis and a plan kind of drafted up by district level. So kind of district heating is seen as a big part of that solution.
Right.
But a lot of the residents were quite unhappy with the way it was implemented.
Yeah. And we can see a little bit of a challenge with blocking the bike lane for the business there, but easy
It
enough to
happens.
get around.
Exactly.
Fascinating, yeah.
Yeah, so basically when this would have been built initially in the early 1900s, you have to imagine that the inner city was, this is back to the sailing, the bike sailing with the strong winds. Yeah, so in the early 1900s, the densities in the center of Amsterdam were much higher than they are today, about 4 times as high.
Oh, okay.
And people were living in very poor conditions. So a lot of problems with communicable diseases, things like cholera. Then finally came also around the same time the kind of the hygienist movement emerged. And that's when we kind of realized we're going to turn right here. We shouldn't be drinking water from the canals, because that's also where we're actually dumping our sewage, for example.
Right.
But at that point in time, building those kinds of districts, these kinds of neighborhoods for the workers, was very idealistic, actually.
Right.
And the thinking was that you could actually going to go straight, so left, yeah. So the thinking was that by providing these improved living conditions where you would have a lot more space, air and light, you'd actually create more productive workers, and this is actually how you emancipate society. So it was a very kind of idealistic way of thinking,
Right.
which later on it also went down the path of some very strange kind of social engineering projects.
Right.
There's still a very nice legacy of a lot of these neighborhoods that were built in the 1920s and 30s are still in many ways like some of the most loved and some of the most attractive neighborhoods in Amsterdam.
Yeah, yeah. I've filmed down along the waterfront there, where those neighborhoods sort of articulate with what looks like may have been, you know, a working waterfront, a working canal, and it's just an absolutely gorgeous bike lane and beautiful trees.
Yeah.
You know, an alley of trees. So it's very,
Yeah,
very
I think
pleasant. It's like a linear park. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it must be Java Island, I think. And actually that whole area, we're going to turn left here. So actually, yeah, the whole Eastern Docklands, I think you're referring to. It was the area where ships were built historically.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And then later on, that was moved over to NDSM here in Amsterdam Noord, where we're heading to next.
Okay. So
The
what are we
east-
rolling into here?
Yeah, so we're actually going to park our bikes, in fact. We're going to park our bikes over arriving at the Ceuvel. And this was a shipyard that's been converted into, kind of a living lab, creative space, and I'll explain that further in a second here. But we'll park our bikes first. Yeah, we might. I think we will. Let's.
Yeah, that might be what we're about to get hit by. Oh, the secret garden right there.
God, I love these little bees. The bee hotels, the insect hotels.
Yeah.
Insect hotels. Okay, so I was hoping that we would do maybe first a little walk, but I think we're gonna maybe sit down first and then do the walk. Yeah, I think I thought maybe we would have a chance to do the walk first, so I explain
yeah.
a little bit the area.
Yeah.
But if I notice how it's going to start raining, then maybe we should have a seat first
Yeah, yeah,
and then do the walk.
yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
you guys don't look too rainproof to me, so
Yeah.
let's.
Yeah.
I was more.
You don't like the weather? Just wait a minute.
I was more amazed or surprised by I thought that we're actually somehow completely dodging this rain.
Yeah.
So it does check out. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the rain is actually there. Okay, so we'll do a really quick walk through so then the whole concept becomes a bit clearer what I just explained. And then we'll get back on the bikes and keep going.
Yeah.
And just watch your step. I think the boardwalk can get just a little bit slippery when it's wet.
Yeah.
It's usually fine, but
You got some trees that
yeah,
got
exactly.
shredded.
This is climate change
Yeah.
in real time.
The weirding of weather. Hello, dude.
Yeah, it's one of their portrait projects.
So Cornelia, why don't you go ahead and explain the structures here? I know you mentioned it.
Yeah, so we're we'll have a little stop over here on the side, but basically we're walking on this boardwalk past these houseboats, which were basically donated for a symbolic amount. So it was a €1 or €2 per transaction. The expensive part was bringing the houseboats on the water and putting them on the land and retrofitting each one of these houseboats into a studio for 1 to 3 small entrepreneurs or creative businesses.
Right.
And that was the way that they met the main requirement for creating this breeding place or incubator for creatives, basically.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Actually, maybe if we stop here, I just always really like, this is one of my favorite views in Amsterdam, because you really see all these layers of the city and how it's constantly changing.
Right.
And very dynamic kind of, the fact that you always have something that's coming in and pushing something else out. So what do I mean by that? So you see actually we started over in the distance, that's the former Shell terrain, with the Amsterdam Tower with the swings and kind of the new city center on the north side of the river. And then you see again this Van de Pek bird that we biked through the kind of quaint homes from the 1920s. It was almost fully, it was around 90% social housing when it was built, a lot less now actually. That was kind of built for the workers as all this industry was booming in Amsterdam North in the early 1900s. When you have that kind of boom, you also need new city functions, things like hospitals. It's actually on the left here was the largest hospital when it was built. Nowadays a hotel, okay? And then you also see very nicely here, actually across the water this way, what Amsterdam North is known for in the last few decades, is kind of light industrial or kind of a lot of warehouses. So these kinds of functions are being pushed out now by all these new residential functions that are coming in that you see across the water. So it's like this constant, even if you want things to stay the same, they won't because it's constantly changing. But very rapidly actually in the last few years. All of these kinds of spaces are giving way much more for what you see across. And that's also what we will see a little bit more as we keep biking.
Are these little houseboats here?
Yeah, no, that's actually Schoonskip. That's this. It aims to be the most sustainable floating neighborhood in Amsterdam. Maybe one of the most sustainable floating neighborhoods in Europe and beyond.
Okay.
And it's actually, I mentioned there's kind of this district that took the ideas from the Ceuvel and kind of took them to the next level. That's Schoonskip. So that's where we're heading to next, actually.
So cute from this
angle.
angle.
It's very nice view from here, absolutely. Yeah. So now kind of going back to the Ceuvel and past these structures. So they have, because I mentioned the land is very polluted, so that's actually also the reason why we're walking on this boardwalk. Mm-hmm. Also the reason why you have all this greenery. It's not just random weeds, it's actually part of a research on phytoremediation, the ability of some plants to clean up some of the soil.
Right.
And then the idea was also for each one of these houseboats to be self-sufficient in terms of managing its own energy and processing its own waste. And why would you want that? Why would you want these houseboats to be self-sufficient?
Is there not any infrastructure for those things?
Exactly, right? So it's actually because there was too little money actually. They had very little money to really put infrastructure in the ground, but the ground is also polluted. First you need to clean the land. They also didn't have the money to do that. But also because it's a temporary project. So after 10 years, potentially, you get kicked out. So it doesn't make sense to put in infrastructure when the expectation is that you take everything with you. Right. So this is an example of a biofilter for the gray water. So that basically just naturally cleans the gray water using layers of sand and gravel and then discharges into the ground. They had to prove to WaterNet that the water meets the right quality when it is discharged into the ground. They have solar panels for the electricity, and the part that was not particularly successful, they built composting toilets for every houseboat. People didn't really like using the composting toilets, so that's why they actually there's regular toilets connected to the city sewage infrastructure in the cafe and by the entrance, and people prefer to use those toilets. Yeah. Saying, I actually just got a couple months ago. I got this. I don't know if he's taking the shortcut. Yeah, actually, this is new. They had their anniversary recently, and I think they made this visual. It's like an infographic on the impact, actually, of the Ceuvel. So, yeah, this is again also part of this effort to kind of in this exercise that they've been going through of trying to justify why they should get an extension, why they should get to stay, trying to visualize and justify the impact that they're having.
It's all in how you tell your story.
Yeah, so
this is great.
So for example, the phytoremediation I mentioned, so they say around 10 different plants that are, and trees that are cleaning, that are being monitored for their ability, for how much they're cleaning up the ground. Wow. And then the tours and companies that come by, and then they give some, so Singapore Embassy of Republic, but exactly. So that, but I'm surprised. I thought they do have 370 organizations and companies that get a tour. And that's like their official tour. So there's, in fact, there's like, they would count it as an unofficial tour. They also kind of keep track. They have an estimate for the unofficial tours as well. So like for all these things, they're trying to kind of quantify their impact a little bit. Always a big question when you try to extend these kinds of projects. Yeah. So they are getting kicked out. They do have a bit of an extension, but the city is going to build the bike lane actually over here, and there will be a couple of apartment buildings. And there will be a cafe or something like the cafe that will stay, and there's the hope that that will still maintain the identity of the Ceuvel somehow. They try to make the case that it should almost get like heritage protection, because what I mentioned, the idea that if you, in the future, this is all gone, then you're not going to be able to understand the impact, like all these ideas that are popping up around it. This is kind of ground zero. So they've tried to make the case that it should really be protected. It's also a little bit of a stretch, a 10-year temporary project, to say that it should have like almost like historical status, but you can count on the creatives to come up with a pretty wild claim. So.
But yeah, some of these houseboats aren't going to last much longer.
No, and I mean, so in principle, they were already waste. And they did kind of retrofit them in a DIY way, but they're like a little bit too hot in the summer, too cold in the winter. Yeah. So, but it's I mean, they've been used for at least an extra 10 years compared to what their life was supposed to be. Yeah. John, this is actually, I don't know if you had a look, but this is quite a nice illustration that kind of shows the evolution of the terrain. So from the time that closed off as a shipyard, I think that was in 2000. And then 2012 is when they won the call, and 2014 is when they actually opened it. So that brings us to basically 2024 now, the 10-year period. And now we know they have this extension for about a year and a half. Okay. Yeah. But they're also very actively looking for another location that can be kind of like the follow-up or the next place after kind of the next phase of the Ceuvel. Yeah.
Keep it going. Somewhere.
It's a little bit like here. Christiania.
Yeah. Except Christiania is not going anywhere. I'm assuming you've visited there.
Yeah. Yeah, it felt actually quite touristy, I have to say.
Yeah.
But that's always a little bit the risk with these places,
right? That's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
I think I've been there on off tourist times, and it felt kind of like quiet and surreal and
do one quick
chill.
loop this and then
the workship. Not a workshop, but a workship.
They've also they've had ideas for all kinds of projects that actually never got implemented. They didn't manage to get off the ground. Mm-hmm. One of my favorites, they wanted to get a biogas boat. Mm-hmm. So they're basically looking for a way to build a biodigester to use to process their organic food waste from the cafe. Yeah. But it's very difficult to get a permit to build a biodigester, because then you basically have to be like a waste management company. So they were like kind of looking for all the loopholes, and this is actually also, I think, very interesting the way the city was actively helping them look for the loopholes in the different legislation to make some of these things happen. Yeah. And for a while they were quite enthusiastic. They thought they found a loophole that would allow them to build a biodigester on a boat. So if it's floating, then it would be kind of a little bit out of the scope of the regulations. Right. So there was like this big enthusiasm, like, okay, we can build a biodigester, it'll be on a boat. Yeah. It fits with the concept, but we can also take it to all these festivals and engage all kinds of people in discussions about waste management and organic waste streams and how we can turn that into biogas. In the end, it didn't work, but it's one of the projects that they would want to implement with the next phase. So this is a nice illustration of kind of the concept of closing all of these loops. Mm-hmm. And they also have this greenhouse with an aquaponic system, so the plants on top and the fish on the bottom, and the plants clean up the waste from the fish. So again, very kind of one of the traditional circular systems. So in the construction, but also in the cafe itself,
and like kind of every dimension has this circularity angle.
Yeah.
This is the metabolic lab, where they also have a lot of different events. So what I mentioned, a lot of companies coming through, but other kinds of, there's something happening right now, sometimes also more community events. Also like very much a space for inspiration. A lot of kind of movie nights, kind of clothes swapping parties, all of these different things that have become super popular the last few years. Yeah.
More of the recovery in the aftermath of our windstorm.
I think they were doing a workshop of sorts, actually. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's like the community building dimension is also super important.
Yeah. All right. And again, sending a huge thank you out to all my Active Towns ambassadors supporting the channel on Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, YouTube Super Thanks, as well as making contributions to the nonprofit. Every little bit adds up and it's much appreciated. Thank you all so much.